Alright guys, I hope all is going well. Clearly I am not there, so we're going to run through this pretty quickly. Anytime you have remaining afterwards, you're more than welcome to use as a study hall to get the next homework done, or if you need it to use for other things, that's okay too. But make sure you have that next homework done when it's due. Check haiku on the calendar and you can see that. I also have it on the haiku page with today's date, so if you want to go on haiku and check that afterwards. So you should have pulled up the notes from haiku with the note packet for this outline. We'll use those today, and then Monday we'll jump to the paper copy. So let's jump in. Synoptic Gospels. First of all, let's establish something. Canonical versus chronological order of the Gospels. We know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as we see it in Scripture, the canonical order, okay, how it falls within the canon of the New Testament. However, the chronological order is a little bit different. We have Mark, certainly written first. 99.9% of scholars would agree on this. However, we have Matthew and Luke, okay, a little bit more difficult to distinguish, partly because they share so much material between their two books, because we have an outside source that many believe contributed to both of them, and they both use a lot of Mark's material. So we know they're definitely after Mark, okay, Mark around the 60s, prior to the siege of Jerusalem. Got Matthew and Luke coming in after that, around 70 AD, or definitely after, and we'll talk about why that we believe it's after in a second, or why we're fairly certain it's after. And then John, written later, probably in the 90s, definitely before 100 AD, but certainly later in the century. So what happened in 70 AD? We have the siege of Jerusalem, depicted here in this picture, and during the First Jewish-Roman War, the Roman legions, by the year 70 AD, breached Jerusalem's outer walls. Remember in the Old Testament, Nehemiah helps to go back. He leaves the king in the Old Testament and goes back to build up these walls again. And it began a systematic ransacking of the city. They assaulted and culminated in the burning and destruction of the temple. How do we know they destroyed the temple? Why are we blaming it on the Romans? Well, let's look at this. We have the Arch of Titus, which is found just southeast of Rome, or of the Roman Forum. First century arch built around 82 AD by the emperor after the death of his older brother Titus. It was to commemorate many of Titus's victories, including the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And I believe the depictions of this are right here on the inside wall, actually on both sides. So definitely a place of prominence that people would have seen going in and out or through the arch. It depicts soldiers returning from Jerusalem with both the Jewish menorah, which we have over here, okay, connected to Hanukkah, and the Ark of the Covenant. So we still don't know where this is to this day, but we certainly have a pretty good idea of who took them, or at least who claims to have taken them. But Jewish menorah and the Ark of the Covenant depicted on the Arch of Titus. So let's look at this first century timeline. We have a couple of interesting things going on here. And note that we don't put 0 here as the beginning of Christ's life, and there's a couple of reasons why. Why not start his birth? Why not say his birth was at 0 AD? Well, according to our modern system, which was suggested by a monk during the 6th century, and more commonly adopted in the 9th, we divide 0 AD as kind of the hypothetical when Jesus was born. However, from Scripture we know Jesus was born late in the reign of Herod the Great, whom we know from other historical sources died in 4 BC according to the Gregorian calendar. So ironically, this calendar, which is centered on the birth of Christ, which divides time in two, okay, is a little bit wrong, a little bit off. So Christ would have been born definitely before Herod dies, partly because this is one of the contexts that we have from Scripture, one of the historical facts. We place his death somewhere near the year 30, okay? Christ dies at 33 years of age. Depending on the year of Jesus' birth, we can say with certainty that Jesus must have died around or near 30 AD. Again, Gospel of Mark, okay? Symbol of Mark is a winged lion. It's traditionally held that John Mark wrote the Gospel using Simon Peter's eyewitness accounts. It's about 16 chapters long. It's the shortest, but probably quickest moving Gospel. If you want the this happened, then this happened, then this happened, go to Mark. It's a great Gospel for that. It was written to the Romans, which is part of the reason why. 70s, we have both St. Matthew, okay, as the human person, and the ox with Luke, written around that time. And then we have 90s, the Gospel of John. John is the eagle, the winged eagle. He starts with an eternal overview of Jesus as the Logos, or Jesus as the Word. Okay, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We'll look at this more as the semester goes on. But he goes on to describe many things with a higher Christology. He doesn't have to say the same things Matthew, Mark, and Luke are saying because he's writing so much later. The church is established already. So when John is talking about a subject, it's not just because, hey, I witnessed a different thing than Matthew would have, or than Peter would have when he told things to to Mark to write down. He writes to a community who's already been living the faith for nearly 60 years, near the end of his life, giving his last witness to the gospel. We don't know if John himself penned it, though many of the church fathers give him that credit, or one of his immediate disciples penned it on his behalf, either around the time of his death or soon after. Okay, John being the only apostle who doesn't suffer a martyr's death. But certainly writing with a higher Christology, giving more emphasis to some broader, more important things. St. Paul's writings, the only thing I want you to pull for this, just a reminder. Okay, we have 1 Thessalonians written before Mark, sometime between 50-54 AD. So just a little chart that this scholar has said a little earlier than the original one we pulled from. So tons of stuff going on. We'll talk about St. Paul. He'll have a whole unit to himself. So apostle or evangelist. We've already said this in class. Okay, of the 4 gospel writers, how many were apostles? Well, 2. Okay, Matthew, known as Levi within his own gospel, and known as Matthew within Luke and Mark, is the tax collector, seen, I believe it's in Matthew 9, when Jesus calls him from his customs post. So Matthew is one of the 12. And then John, the beloved disciple, as he's called time and time again within his own gospel, is also an apostle. So who is Mark? Well, we know Mark is a close friend and disciple of the apostle Peter. Definitely kind of Peter's traveling buddy. Peter probably assisted Mark in the writing of the first gospel. So remember, all the gospels have apostolic origin. So Mark's apostolic, or his apostle connection, per se, would be Peter. Who's Luke? It's believed that Luke was a physician, possibly a personal friend and disciple of Paul. Okay, and though Paul is not originally one of the 12 apostles, he kind of moves into that role of a high bishop. Definitely not equal to Peter. He submits to Peter often in Acts of the Apostles. They butt heads often in the Acts of the Apostles. But a very close friend to Paul, having that apostolic connection there as well. Okay, we'll do this one, 2 more, and then we'll call it a day. So Synoptics, just some facts and figures. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels. And what does it mean? It literally just means, okay, so etymology, study of words. Syn meaning same, okay, optic, like optic lens, okay, coming from eye, so same eye. Essentially, they have the same point of view. Partly we say that because many of the stories are similar. We'll talk about that on Monday. Close to 95% at times overlapping between some of the Gospels. So we'll conclude here, okay, knowing that the Synoptics include Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Synoptic, just kind of a straight up definition for it when we reference it to the Gospels, refers to the 3 Gospels written from a very similar vantage point, each recalling similar parables and miracles. All right, that's all I got. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Enjoy it. If you want to look on haiku for the next homework, you can use the rest of the class to do that. Or if you need to work on something else, that is okay as well.